In January of 1692, in a little town called Salem Village, Betty Parris and Abigail Williams, cousins who lived in the home of Betty's father, Reverend Samuel Parris, began to experience something distressing. Their condition would ignite a hysteria that would engulf multiple communities and lead to the death of at least 26 of their neighbors, all of whom were accused of practicing witchcraft. At the end of 1691, it appears that due to more internal squabbling, not all the members of the church had paid their share of Parris's wages. Indeed, some of them had never been terribly keen on having him as their minister in the first place, and so, as winter fell on New England, Parris didn't receive his fee. He complained publicly about it, even in his sermons. The question of whether he was supposed to receive that 6 pounds worth of firewood was a particularly hot point of contention, specifically because he ran out of firewood at the beginning of the winter. Now, perhaps it was just a petty spat between neighbors in a tiny town, but there were more sinister things going on in New England. The new King of England had canceled the Massachusetts Bay Colony's charter. That means they didn't have a constitution. The colonists feared that the next appointed governor, who came in with a new constitution, might not protect their rights, and they might not get any support for their Puritan religious practices. What's more, the new king had engaged in a war with the French. French soldiers and Native American allies coming down from present-day Canada raided many New England towns and murdered or kidnapped many of their residents. Some survivors from some of these attacks up in Maine had taken refuge in the homes of the residents of Salem Village and were living among them as winter fell at the end of 1691. So there was a lot of tension. Those were the circumstances in Salem Village when Samuel Parris's daughter and niece both began to exhibit symptoms of their very strange, inexplicable malady. He brought in several physicians to diagnose the affliction, but none of them could explain it until Dr. William Griggs suggested that it might be witchcraft. Now, this might seem ludicrous today, but at the time, not only was witchcraft generally accepted as real, but it was seen as a very direct threat. It was so thoroughly accepted that New Englanders had already accused numerous people of being witches, and after convicting them in their courts, had executed some of them by hanging. The first of the people who were executed in New England, her name was Alce Young, a young woman in her 30s, who was hanged in Windsor, Connecticut in 1647. Very little information has survived to explain why Young was thought to be a witch, but it does appear that there was an influenza outbreak in her town just before her accusation, and 4 children who lived just next door to her died from it. Very often when bad things like this would happen, the people would look for some sort of malevolent power to blame. Other accusations and even confessions would follow. There was a witch panic in Hartford that led to numerous convictions and 4 executions in 1662. As late as 1688 in Boston, a washerwoman, an Irish Catholic named Anne Glover, was accused of bewitching the children of her employer, John Goodwin. They said she caused them to lose control over their bodies and flap their arms like birds, or to try to harm others, and those things were happening. Glover, who could hardly speak English and was a Catholic outsider to boot, was hanged in November of that year. Now, it's important to understand that at this time in New England, rational, Harvard-trained thinkers were writing treatises about witchcraft. Ministers preached fiery sermons about it from the pulpit. In this atmosphere, anyone who questioned whether witchcraft was real would have been seen by the community as a lunatic at best. At worst, they would be seen as a heretic, and probably a witch themselves.